Title: The Haunted School Cricket Match Part 1. The Ball into the Dark. It was a bright, sunny afternoon at the school playground. The sound of laughter and excitement echoed through the air as a group of friends gathered for their daily cricket match. Among them was Rohan, a 16-year-old student with a passion for cricket, always ready for a challenge. Today, however, would be no ordinary match. The game was fierce, with both teams battling to outdo each other. Rohan was at the crease, his bat in hand, ready to hit the ball for a six. He could feel the wind rush past him as he faced the bowler, his eyes fixed on the ball. The bowler ran up, releasing the ball with speed. Rohan swung with all his might, connecting perfectly. The ball flew high into the air, spiraling toward the horizon. The players watched as the ball soared over the boundary wall, headed for the old, abandoned school building that lay just beyond the playground. A few of the students chuckled, knowing the ball had gone too far. "Looks like we'll have to go get it from the old school," said Arjun, one of Rohan's friends, but his tone held a touch of uncertainty. The old school building, once a place of learning, was now a decaying relic. No one had stepped foot inside for years. The rumors surrounding it were enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. Whispers of strange occurrences, cold winds, eerie noises, and ghostly sightings had kept the locals away. But today, it seemed, fate had other plans. Rohan, feeling a sense of daring, volunteered. "I'll go get it," he said, even as a knot twisted in his stomach. It was just a ball, after all. He could easily run, grab it, and return before anyone had even noticed. His friends watched as he walked toward the school, the sun's rays casting long shadows on the ground. The closer he got, the more oppressive the air became, and the hairs on his neck began to stand up. The old building loomed before him, its windows like dark eyes watching his every move. As Rohan reached the rusted gates, he hesitated, his footsteps slowing. "Rohan, are you sure you want to go in there?" Arjun called out, his voice shaky. Rohan turned to look at his friends one last time. "I'll be fine," he reassured them, though doubt gnawed at his mind. Pushing open the creaky gate, he stepped inside. The place was even more eerie up close. Broken windows, cracked walls, and overgrown vines created an atmosphere of decay and neglect. The ball was nowhere in sight, so Rohan ventured deeper into the building, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was thick with dust, and a strange smell, musty, like something long forgotten, filled his nostrils. He carefully stepped through the empty hallways, trying to stay focused. The ball had to be around here somewhere. Suddenly, Rohan stopped dead in his tracks. A cold wind swept through the corridor, despite there being no open windows. It brushed against his skin, sending a shiver down his spine. His heart pounded in his chest as a soft whisper echoed through the halls, so faint he could barely make it out. "Leave, now." Rohan's blood ran cold. He spun around, but no one was there. The building was deserted, or was it? The forgotten classroom. Rohan's pulse raced as he stood frozen in the hallway. The whispering wind had faded, but the feeling of something or someone watching him lingered. He slowly took a step forward, his shoes creaking on the dusty floor. The silence was deafening, broken only by his own breathing. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. There it was again, the faint whisper, "Leave." Rohan's hand gripped the flashlight in his pocket. He wasn't sure why he had brought it. The daylight was still strong outside, but now he felt an overwhelming need to be prepared. Slowly he pulled it out, its beam cutting through the shadows ahead. He moved deeper into the school, past broken doors and cracked windows. The hallways were narrow, the air stale. Dust clung to every surface like a forgotten secret. Each step he took seemed to echo, the sound bouncing off the walls as if the building was alive. Listening, waiting. Rohan turned a corner and stumbled into a large, abandoned classroom. Desks lay overturned, chairs scattered, and chalk markings from what seemed like decades ago still faintly graced the blackboard. The room was suffocating in its stillness. Suddenly, a shiver ran down Rohan's spine, and he instinctively swung the flashlight around. The beam fell on something that made his heart skip a beat, a small, old ball, lying alone in the center of the room. It wasn't the cricket ball he had hit, but a small rubber ball, worn with age. His curiosity piqued. Rohan bent down to pick it up, but the moment his fingers brushed the ball, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. He froze, feeling a chill that went straight through him, and then he heard it again, a voice. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was loud, almost desperate, a child's voice. "Help! Help me!" Rohan's blood ran cold. He whipped around, scanning the room, but the classroom was empty. His eyes darted to every corner, but there was no sign of anyone. Yet, the voice was clear. It was coming from inside the room, inside the walls. He backed away, his hand trembling as he raised the flashlight again. The beam flickered, and for a split second, he thought he saw something move in the corner of his eye. But when he looked again, there was nothing there. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. Rohan jumped, his heart pounding. Panic surged through him, and he rushed to the door, pulling at the handle with all his strength. But the door wouldn't budge. It was as though something or someone was holding it closed from the other side. "Rohan!" The voice came again, louder now, closer. Rohan's eyes widened in terror as he turned slowly, the room now feeling more oppressive than ever. He had to get out of here. He had to get back to the others. But as he stepped toward the window, hoping to break it open and escape, something strange happened. The walls of the room seemed to shift. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the classroom, once empty, now appeared different, darker somehow. The desks, which had been scattered, were now arranged neatly in rows, as though the room had been used just moments ago. Rohan's breathing quickened. This wasn't right. He was starting to feel disoriented, like the room itself was alive, changing with every passing second. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. A shadow, a child's shadow. A small figure standing motionless at the back of the room, watching him. "Help me, Rohan, please." Rohan spun around, his flashlight trembling in his hand, but there was nothing there. Just the empty classroom. The shadow was gone. He pressed his back against the door, eyes wide, his breath shallow. "This is just some trick," he whispered to himself. "It's just my mind playing games." But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The door handle rattled suddenly, violently, and Rohan yelped, stumbling back in shock. The door swung open with a creak, revealing the long, dark hallway once more. And there, at the end of the hallway, he saw it. A figure. A pale, gaunt figure of a child, staring at him with hollow eyes. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, its face twisted into an expression of pain. Its mouth opened, emitting an eerie, bone-chilling wail. Rohan's legs went weak, and he nearly collapsed, but somehow he found the strength to run. He bolted out of the room, past the endless hallways, not daring to look back. Every step echoed in the silent school, every breath quick and ragged. But no matter how fast he ran, the sound of the child's voice, "Help me," seemed to follow him, growing louder, closer, until it was all he could hear. Part 3. The Unseen Eyes. Rohan ran down the hallway, his heart hammering in his chest. Every breath felt like it was being squeezed out of him, and the sound of his footsteps echoed loudly in the darkness. He couldn't hear anything else. No voices, no whispers, no strange sounds. But he didn't dare stop to listen. As he sprinted, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. He glanced over his shoulder and for a moment thought he saw a shadow flicker in the corner of his vision. But when he turned fully, there was nothing there, just the oppressive emptiness of the hall. He reached the front door of the school, his hands trembling as he pulled on the handle. But to his horror, it wouldn't open. The door was locked, as if some unseen force was holding it shut. He panicked, yanking harder, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out, please," he shouted, his voice breaking. But no one answered. Rohan felt trapped. Every exit was blocked. There was nowhere to go. Suddenly a cold wind swept past him, and the door behind him creaked open. Part 4. The Forgotten History. Rohan finally tore his gaze away from the ghostly child, his mind racing. Without thinking, he turned and bolted down the corridor, pushing himself faster than he thought possible. His eyes darted from side to side, looking for any way out. But the hallways seemed endless, a maze of doors that all led to nowhere. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, faint at first but growing louder. Someone, or something, was following him. Rohan stumbled through the darkened hallways, desperate for escape. Then, just as his legs began to weaken, he stumbled into what looked like a library. The air was thick with dust, and old books sat untouched on the shelves, their pages yellowed and fragile. His flashlight flickered as he stepped inside, casting long shadows across the room. As he moved deeper into the library, a strange feeling of déjà vu washed over him, as if he had been here before. But that was impossible. He had never entered the school this far. In the center of the room, a large, ancient book sat open on a desk. Its pages were filled with strange symbols and faded writing. Rohan's curiosity got the best of him. He approached the desk and began to read the words aloud. It didn't make sense at first, but as he continued, something clicked. The words spoke of a tragedy, an event that occurred years ago when the school had been filled with life. A group of children, trapped in the building during a storm, had disappeared without a trace. The book described how their spirits were never allowed to rest, cursed to haunt the school forever. Their cries for help, their unfinished business, were now the very things that trapped Rohan in this nightmare. Rohan slammed the book shut, his breath coming in short gasps. He had to find a way out, but he had to understand more. The answers were here, buried in the past. Part 5. The ghost's secret. Rohan's thoughts raced. The curse that haunted the school wasn't just some old myth. It was real. The children, their spirits, were trapped here, bound to the walls of this forsaken place. But how had they died, and what did they want from him? The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. The ghostly child wasn't just a random spirit. It was one of them, a child who had died here, crying out for help, hoping for someone to break the curse. The library grew colder as Rohan continued to stand there, trapped in his thoughts. He knew that he couldn't escape without facing the truth. The ghost wanted him to help, but how? What could he possibly do to break the curse that had lingered for so long? He glanced back down at the book, his fingers lingering on its surface. There was more to the story. He could feel it. He had to find out what had happened to the children. The answers were hidden here, within these pages. He flipped the book open again, scanning the pages as the room grew quieter. Then his eyes stopped on one page. There, in faded ink, was a single name. It was the name of a child who had died in the school years ago, one of the many victims of the storm. But there was something about this name that made Rohan's stomach churn. It was familiar. Too familiar. It was his own name. Part 6. The reflection in the mirror. Rohan's hands shook as he stared down at the book. His name was written there, not in any ordinary ink, but in a faded, almost blood-red color. His mind raced. This couldn't be real. There had to be a mistake. He couldn't possibly be connected to this cursed place. Yet the longer he stood there, the more a sense of dread settled over him. His own name in that book meant something. It was no coincidence. He slammed the book shut and backed away, the weight of it pressing on his chest. The library around him felt like it was closing in. The shadows grew longer, stretching out toward him, and the walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Then he heard it again, a soft whisper, this time clearer than before. Rohan. He turned sharply, looking around, but there was no one there. He was alone. His breathing quickened, and his heartbeat thundered in his ears. The whisper had come from the hallway, from the direction of the old classroom. Hesitantly, Rohan moved toward the door. As he stepped into the hallway, the cold, oppressive air grew stronger. It felt like someone was right behind him, breathing down his neck. He glanced at the walls, the floors, every corner of the building. The school felt alive with an eerie energy, as if it were waiting for him to make the next move. He reached a large, cracked mirror hanging on the wall near the staircase. It reflected nothing but the empty hallway, but something about the reflection was off. Rohan paused, his eyes narrowing. In the mirror, he saw himself. But there was something wrong. His reflection wasn't following his movements. It was staring at him, its eyes wide and filled with a strange, knowing terror. Rohan's breath caught in his throat as his reflection opened its mouth, whispering the words, "Don't trust them. They're watching you." Before Rohan could react, the reflection of himself grinned, a wide, malicious smile that made his blood run cold. With a gasp, he turned away, not daring to look back. But as he did, the whisper echoed through the halls again. "Rohan, you can't escape." Part 7. The Locked Door. Rohan's heart raced, and a cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He forced himself to keep moving, pushing past the mirror and down the hallway. His mind was a whirl of confusion, trying to understand what he had just seen. Was it just a trick of the mind? Or was something in the school toying with him, messing with his perceptions? But the chill in the air grew colder, the whispering voices never stopped, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being hunted by something unseen. As he reached the end of the hallway, Rohan saw another door, one he hadn't noticed before. It was old, wooden, with rusted hinges, and more importantly, it was locked. He approached cautiously, his hand trembling as he grasped the cold doorknob. The door gave no resistance. It was as though it didn't even exist. A deep sense of foreboding washed over him. Behind him there was a sudden rustling sound, like something shifting in the darkness. He spun around, but the hallway was empty. The sound seemed to be coming from behind the locked door. Something was inside. Rohan's curiosity overpowered his fear. He had to know what was on the other side. He yanked at the doorknob again, but it remained firmly shut. Then, with a sudden, eerie creak, the door slowly began to open on its own. Rohan stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. The door creaked open wider, revealing an old room. The walls were lined with dusty bookshelves, and in the middle of the room sat an old wooden chest, sealed shut with a thick chain. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind him. "Rohan." The voice, soft and chilling, came from the shadows in the corner. Rohan spun around, his pulse racing. There, in the farthest corner of the room, stood the pale figure of a child, the same child he had seen earlier. But this time, there was something different. The child wasn't alone. Behind it stood a dark shape, an even darker presence, a figure that seemed to be made entirely of shadows, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Part 8. The Shadow's Grasp. Rohan felt his throat tighten as the shadowy figure moved closer, its form twisting unnaturally, as if it wasn't bound by the laws of reality. The child, standing motionless, spoke again, its voice trembling with an eerie sadness. "Help me. Help all of us." Rohan's legs felt like jelly. He tried to move, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. The dark figure took another step forward, its eyes glowing brighter, and Rohan could feel an unnatural pull, a pressure, like invisible hands trying to drag him toward the figure. "Get away!" Rohan gasped, pushing back with all his strength. But the shadows seemed to wrap around him, suffocating him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The child's voice echoed through his head. "They won't let you leave, not unless you help." Suddenly, Rohan felt a sharp pain in his chest. His body burned as if something was trying to tear him apart from the inside. He staggered backward, his feet hitting the old chest, knocking it over. The lid flew open, and inside, Rohan saw something that nearly made him scream. A body. A child's body, pale and lifeless, with hollow eyes staring up at him. He turned around quickly. Standing in the doorway of the classroom was the same pale figure, the child. Its hollow eyes locked onto his, sending a chill down his spine. The child's lips curled into a twisted smile, and it took a step forward, dragging its feet across the floor. "Help me. I'm waiting for you." Rohan's heart skipped a beat. He had to escape. He had to get out before it was too late. Part 4. The Forgotten History. Rohan finally tore his gaze away from the ghostly child, his mind racing. Without thinking, he turned and bolted down the corridor, pushing himself faster than he thought possible. His eyes darted from side to side, looking for any way out. But the hallways seemed endless, a maze of doors that all led to nowhere. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, faint at first but growing louder. Someone, or something, was following him. Rohan stumbled through the darkened hallways, desperate for escape. Rohan felt drawn to it. He approached the clock cautiously, his eyes fixed on the still hands. There was something about the clock, something wrong. As he stared at it, the clock began to chime. The sound echoed throughout the building, loud and oppressive. 1 chime, 2 chimes, 3, then it stopped, and everything fell silent. But when Rohan looked up, he saw that the clock's hands had shifted. The time was no longer midnight, it was 3 a.m. Part 10. The Hallway of Souls. As Rohan stepped back from the clock, the air in the room grew heavier, darker. The whispering voices returned, growing louder. He spun around, his eyes wide, and saw something that made his blood freeze. The hallway outside had transformed. It was no longer a hallway. It was a long, narrow corridor lined with hundreds of portraits of children. Their eyes were all turned toward him, and their faces twisted in sorrow. Rohan's heart pounded in his chest as the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before him. Each step he took echoed as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. The faces in the portraits followed his every move, their mouths silently pleading for help. The shadows grew thicker as he moved forward, and the voices in his head grew louder. "Help! Help us, Rohan!" Rohan tried to turn back, but the hallway behind him had disappeared. He was trapped in the corridor, with nowhere to go. Part 11, The Door That Never Opens. Rohan's footsteps were muffled by the heavy silence that surrounded him. The corridor, lined with the staring faces of the ghostly portraits, seemed to stretch on forever. His heart hammered in his chest, his every step more hesitant than the last. The whispers had grown louder, almost deafening. The voices of the children, or perhaps their ghosts, were crying out to him, their words melding into a chorus of desperate pleas. "Help us, Rohan, help us, before it's too late." He glanced behind him, but the hallway he had just come from had vanished as though it had never existed. The portraits, their eyes now glowing faintly, seemed to pulsate in rhythm with the whispers, each one more distorted than the last. Rohan gritted his teeth. He had to keep moving. There had to be some way out. He had to find the truth, find a way to break the curse, before it consumed him completely. He reached the end of the corridor and saw a door, an old, iron-bound door, unlike any other he had encountered. It was larger than the others, its edges etched with strange symbols that seemed to move in the flickering light. With shaking hands, he reached for the door handle, his breath catching in his throat. He turned the knob, but it wouldn't budge. No matter how hard he pushed or pulled, the door remained sealed. "Open, damn you!" Rohan screamed, pulling at the handle desperately, but the door didn't respond. He stepped back, his mind racing. There had to be a way. Maybe there was a hidden mechanism, a secret to unlock it. He turned to the portraits, his eyes scanning the walls for any clues. That's when he saw it. At the base of the door, in the darkened shadows, there was a small, barely visible keyhole. It looked ancient, rusted, as if it hadn't been used in years. Rohan dropped to his knees, his fingers trembling as he ran them over the doorframe. He had to find the key. The whispers seemed to grow louder, urging him on, their voices a jumbled mess of desperation. But as he looked around, he realized there was no key in sight. Part 12, The Key. Rohan's hands shook as he stood, his mind racing. There had to be a key somewhere. The door, the keyhole, they were all part of a puzzle. He had to figure it out. His eyes scanned the hallway again, this time more carefully. The portraits seemed to watch him even more closely now, their eyes flickering with an unnatural light. It was as if the figures in the portraits were alive, their gazes following him, their faces contorted with silent screams. Desperation gripped him. He had to move quickly. Something was coming. He could feel it. Rohan stepped forward, approaching the first portrait. The child's face was pale, its eyes wide and filled with a deep, hollow sadness. The child's mouth opened, and Rohan was sure he heard the whisper again, "Find the key." But there was no time to dwell on it. He moved to the next portrait, then the next, his hands brushing against the cold frames. As he moved down the line, a cold shiver ran down his spine, and he stopped in front of one particular portrait. This one was different. The child in the painting was smiling, a wide, disturbing smile that seemed out of place. Rohan's pulse quickened as his eyes locked on the portrait's left hand. It was holding something small and shiny. A key. He reached out instinctively, his fingers trembling as he grasped the key from the painting's hand. It was cold to the touch, almost painfully so, as if it had been locked away for centuries. Rohan didn't hesitate. He turned and hurried back to the iron door, his heart pounding in his chest. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. He exhaled in relief as the door slowly creaked open, revealing a darkened room beyond. Part 13, The Forgotten Room. The door opened with an unsettling groan, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Rohan's flashlight flickered as he stepped inside, the air musty and thick with the scent of decay. The room was filled with old furniture, covered in dusty sheets. Broken mirrors hung on the walls, their surfaces cracked and warped. The space felt like it hadn't been touched in years. But as Rohan's eyes adjusted to the gloom, he noticed something peculiar. The walls were lined with more portraits, like the ones in the hallway. But these portraits were different. They weren't of children. These were faces of adults, their expressions cold, vacant. And in the center of the room was a large wooden table, its surface cluttered with strange objects. Old books, jars filled with dark liquid, and a tarnished silver chalice sat atop it. But what caught Rohan's eye was an ancient book, a large tome, its cover adorned with the same strange symbols he had seen on the door. Rohan walked cautiously toward the table, his hands trembling as he reached for the book. The instant his fingers brushed the cover, the room seemed to shift. A cold wind swept through, and the once still air became charged with a strange energy. The pages of the book turned by themselves, as if guided by an invisible hand. Rohan's eyes widened as he read the ancient text, the words becoming clearer with each turn. To break the curse, you must offer a soul, bound by blood, to the school that haunts you. Only then will the spirits be freed. Rohan's blood ran cold. Offer a soul? What did that mean? Was the curse asking him to sacrifice someone? As he stared at the text in disbelief, a shadow moved in the corner of the room.
Part 14. The Figure in the Dark. Rohan's body tensed as he slowly turned toward the darkened corner of the room. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but then he saw it. A figure, standing motionless in the shadows. It was tall, its shape indistinct, but its glowing eyes were unmistakable. The figure stepped forward, emerging from the darkness. It was humanoid, but its form was twisted, like a shadow-given shape. The air grew colder as it approached, its presence suffocating. Rohan's heart pounded in his chest, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his legs felt frozen, rooted to the spot. He couldn't move. The figure's voice was low and guttural, like the growl of a beast. "You have read the book," it said. "You have seen the truth. But do you have the courage to face it?" Rohan's throat felt dry, but he managed to force words out. Who are you?" The figure's eyes glowed brighter, burning with an unnatural intensity. "I am the guardian of the curse, the one who keeps the souls trapped within this school. And now, you must choose. A soul must be offered to end this cycle of torment. But it cannot be just any soul. It must be one that has willingly entered the school." Rohan's eyes widened in horror. "What do you mean? I didn't choose to come here. I was playing cricket. And the ball?" "The ball brought you here," the figure interrupted, its voice dripping with malice. "And now, the fate of the souls depends on your choice. Break the curse or become a part of it forever." The figure raised its hand, and the shadows around Rohan seemed to pulse, ready to swallow him whole. Part 15. The Choice. Rohan felt the weight of the figure's words pressing down on him. The curse, the school, it wasn't just a place, it was alive. And now he was part of it. He had been chosen, or perhaps doomed, by some twisted force beyond his understanding. His mind raced as the figure moved closer, its glowing eyes piercing into him. The air around them crackled with dark energy, and Rohan could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. There was no way out, no easy escape. "Make your choice," the figure growled. "The souls are waiting. Will you free them, or will you become one of them?" Rohan's heart thudded in his chest as his thoughts swirled. The ghosts, the children, their cries echoed in his ears. The curse had trapped them here, and he was the key. But what kind of choice was this? To sacrifice someone? To offer a soul? He thought of his friends, of the life he had left behind. Was he the only one who could break this curse? Could he truly sacrifice someone to save himself? Or was there another way? As the figure reached out, Rohan made his decision. Part 16. The Binding Ritual. Rohan's chest tightened as the shadowy figure loomed over him, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. The room had grown colder still, and the air felt thick with the weight of a decision that could cost him everything. His mind raced. There had to be another way. He couldn't just sacrifice someone to break the curse. There had to be another solution. But the figure wasn't giving him time to think. "The souls cannot be freed without a price," the figure growled, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "You must choose, Rohan. The blood of one must be offered. It's the only way." Rohan's breath came in ragged gasps. "But why me? Why is this happening to me?" The figure's grin twisted unnaturally, and it stepped closer. "You were chosen the moment you stepped foot into this place. The curse has been waiting for someone like you to break it. Someone willing to sacrifice." Rohan's stomach turned. He couldn't allow this. He couldn't let these creatures make him their pawn. But the room seemed to pulse around him, the walls closing in, the whispers of the trapped souls growing louder. The ritual must be completed, the figure continued, its voice like a slow, methodical chant. Blood must be spilled. The souls must be freed. The curse can never end without a willing sacrifice. Willing, Rohan repeated, his voice trembling. What do you mean, willing? What if I don't choose? The curse will claim you, the figure hissed, and your soul will join the others. You will become one of us, bound forever to the school. Rohan's mind reeled. He didn't know what to do, where to turn. The weight of the decision was suffocating, but he couldn't make a choice that would condemn another. He had to find a way to escape this twisted nightmare. Suddenly, he remembered something from the book he had found earlier. The words on the pages, the cryptic warning, there had to be something in there that could help him. He had missed a detail, a hint, something that could stop this ritual from happening. Part 17, The Hidden Passage. With a burst of clarity, Rohan spun around, his eyes searching the room for anything that could help him. His fingers brushed the spine of the ancient book again, and he began flipping through its pages, desperate to find a solution. The figure watched him silently, its presence like a dark cloud in the room. It didn't move, didn't speak, as if waiting for Rohan to make his decision. His eyes flicked over the text, his fingers trembling as he turned each page. Then he found it, a passage he hadn't noticed before. The writing was faint, almost invisible, but it described a hidden way to end the curse without sacrificing a soul. The solution wasn't what he had expected. The passage spoke of a secret ritual, one that would require an offering, but not blood. It said the curse could be broken if the souls within the school could be freed by releasing them from their bindings. The ritual required the caster to face the source of the curse, the entity that had bound the souls to this place. Rohan's heart skipped a beat. The entity, that dark force, it wasn't the shadowy figure standing before him. It was something else. Something much more powerful, lurking deep within the heart of the school. He had to find it. He had to confront it. With newfound determination, Rohan slammed the book shut and turned toward the shadowy figure. I won't sacrifice anyone, Rohan said, his voice steady but filled with defiance. I will break this curse by facing the true source of it. You can't stop me. The figure's grin widened, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. You cannot escape your fate, boy, it snarled. You have no idea what you're up against. The curse is older than you can imagine. No one has ever escaped its grasp. Rohan ignored the figure's warning. His mind was made up. He didn't know exactly where to go, but he had to find the heart of the curse. Somewhere in the depths of the school, the truth lay waiting, and he would uncover it, no matter the cost. The room beyond was vast, cavernous, and shrouded in shadows. Rohan's flashlight flickered, casting weak beams of light across the space. The walls were lined with strange symbols and arcane runes, etched deep into the stone. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the whispers of the trapped souls were deafening. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, ancient and covered in dust. The ground around it was cracked and broken, as if something had been fighting to escape for centuries. Rohan stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the room. He could feel the presence of something malevolent, something ancient. The curse, the source of the dark power that had bound the souls of the children to this place. And then he saw it, a figure shrouded in shadow, standing near the altar. It was tall, its form impossibly dark, as if it were made of the very darkness itself. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, and as it turned toward Rohan, its voice echoed in his mind. You've come, it whispered, the one who seeks to break the curse. But you are too late, child. No one has ever escaped me. Rohan's breath caught in his throat as he faced the entity. It was more than a creature. It was the embodiment of the curse, the source of all the suffering in the school. I will stop you, Rohan said, his voice filled with resolve. You can't keep them here forever. The souls will be freed. The entity laughed, a low, hollow sound that reverberated through the room. You think you can defeat me? I am the darkness. I am the curse. Part 20, The Final Confrontation. Rohan stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. The entity towered before him, its presence overwhelming. But Rohan refused to back down. I won't let you win, Rohan said, his voice steady. I will end this. For them. With a sudden motion, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small key he had taken from the painting. He held it aloft, feeling its cold weight in his hand. It was the key to the curse, the key to ending it. The entity's eyes narrowed. You cannot defeat me with that trinket. It is nothing compared to the power I possess. But Rohan wasn't listening anymore. He raised the key high, reciting the words he had read in the ancient book, the ritual that would free the trapped souls and break the curse.